My experience with General Davis, of course, it was later on. I didn't serve under him in Vietnam or at any other time, but I was I was brought up and assigned to his office as his special assistant, speechwriter, junior aide, that kind of thing. And my wife and I, Sherry and I, would just have an unbelievable experience with someone, he and his wife Knox, who we would come to totally respect, and quite frankly would become our role models in life. Ray Davis was a man of a quiet man, but of great internal strength. A man you felt it. It exuded. A man who obviously the nation had recognized his valor in in 2 wars anyway, 3 wars overall, I guess. A Medal of Honor recipient, Navy Cross recipient, and so forth. Certainly a man of great courage. But that he had that courage, in my judgment anyway, he had that courage in all that we did. And when he entered the room, wasn't a particularly tall man, but when he entered the room, he drew respect. We went in, I can remember us, we still had the advisors fighting in Vietnam. No, that was later on. I'm sorry, believe that. I think my favorite story about Ray Davis, you can read and publish all the great, tactical things that he did, the operational things that he did, the heroic things that he did. But he was assistant commandant of the Marine Corps, and that it was now 70, 71. The crescendo of against the war was getting greater and greater within the education, great deal of uproar and whatever. And this is the kind of courage. He called Dwight Weber. Dwight was the military assistant. Called us in one day and says, "We're going on a campaign to youth program." "What, General?" "Yep." He said, "What we're going to do is we're going to tell the other side of the story. Make it happen. We want to talk. We'll talk to high schools. We'll talk to college. We'll talk to anybody that will listen to me." So it began. We developed this campaign to youth program and went around the country with it. And I guess my favorite story, favorite example of the impact that I thought it had anyway, and I think it did have an impact, was in Portland, Oregon. Portland, pretty liberal town. And we were to talk to a public high school in, I guess, 11th, 12th grade or whatever, and then go around afterwards to seminars. I'll be darned. The school invited other schools to come. So we get to the auditorium, and this is packed with high school kids. The general gets up, he's in his greens, and he was never a particularly great public speaker. I mean, he had the same speech. He wouldn't let me change it. I'd try to, that he finally was comfortable with and that. And he gave it that day. And then he opens the audience for questions and answers. Well, I knew we might be in trouble when the president of the student council was there in a dashiki and a hat and introduced him as this here man from the government. Oh, we may be, this may be an interesting session. But as this little Georgian could do, he gave his speech, then he stepped out from the podium, asked for questions, and they started, and boom, fired, and he'd lay back to them, hey, well, here's what happened, here's this, here's that, whatever. And I watched this amazing thing happen. We had all these very, very difficult, very fiery, very left-wing, if you will, liberal questions Then all of a sudden, there's this little hand went up in the middle. And all of a sudden, Middle America stood up, the silent majority. And the questions started to turn. And they started to turn about, well, what about this? Why is it important that our nation is doing what is it? Well, what about, and it was amazing to see this, this unbelievable turning of the audience. Finished this speech. And all of a sudden I see the rush coming, and I'm trying to get between him and, this rush. And I'll never forget it. The young lady, maybe she's a junior, senior, I don't know. And she had big tears in her eyes. And she got up like this, and I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to change my mind. And that said it all. It said, hey, maybe you should listen to the other side of the story. What's the moral of that? I think I've carried that all from that day on, is always talking to folks about, hey, yeah, you just heard this side of the story. Let's hear the other side of the story before we make our decision or our judgment. And guess what? There may be 3 and 4 sides of this story before we can come to somewhere that might be close to the truth.
That's fantastic. Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's a great story. I appreciate it. And I've kept you. Thank you. That's
oh, well, if you like, I'll buy you some lunch.